Steel clashed beneath a dying sun as General Aelius Marcellus approached Rome on a wounded horse, each hoofbeat echoing like a verdict. Dust clung to his armor, coating the dents and blood grooves as if guilt itself wished to be seen. Chronicler Varro followed at a distance, whispering notes into a cracked wax tablet, recording the line later found in a damaged ledger fragment. He returned alive, yet already condemned. The road narrowed, forcing Aelius to ride beside the stumbling column of survivors. Sister Eleni walked with measured steps, her hands stained with dried salve, her breath uneven as she steadied a young archer who trembled after days without sleep. Aelius felt the cold weight of Roman expectation press upon his shoulders. He saw fields burned by retreat, villages emptied by imperial requisition, and veterans who avoided his eyes out of respect or despair. When the city's outer walls emerged through the haze, the bronze gates glimmered with a harsh light that made every scar on his forearms throb. Fear twisted through him, not of death, but of being paraded as a failure before the empire he had sworn to protect. Livius, barely 17, limped to his side and pressed a steadying hand against his vambrace. The gesture carried a fragile hope, a reminder that some faith survived the ruins of their campaign. Aelius lowered his gaze, unwilling to let the boy see the fracture in his resolve. Above them, ravens circled, drawn by wounded men who collapsed along the path like discarded offerings. As they neared the gate, Praetorian guards stepped forward in ceremonial formation. Sunlight flashed against their polished armor while their commander raised an iron circlet shaped for binding disgraced officers. Sister Eleni whispered a brief prayer against the cruelty of rulers, her fingers tightening around the small bone icon she carried for protection. The circlet closed around Aelius with ritual precision. Chains followed, heavy and deliberate, linking him to the imperial will he once served with pride. The crowd watched in suffocating silence, broken only by murmured accusations that drifted like smoke. Aelius lifted his head, refusing to bow even as fear hollowed his breath. He sensed that survival was no blessing. Something darker awaited beyond those gates, waiting to claim what defeat had not taken. The torches lining the archway sputtered in the rising wind, scattering embers that clung to his cloak like omens. Sister Eleni felt her pulse quicken as distant horns sounded, announcing officials who would determine his fate with cold indifference tonight. Dragged through the dim corridors of the Palatine, Aelius felt wet stone breathe around him, the scent of incense struggling to bury the deeper odor of rot. Torches flickered against marble veined with old smoke, revealing Sister Eleni as she steadied Livius near a battered column, her trembling hands betraying a dread she fought to hide. Drops of blood trailed behind the boy like a quiet petition for mercy. Senators gathered within a vaulted chamber where a bronze seal rested upon a table, the same artifact later unearthed beneath collapsed flooring. Their voices rose and fell like furtive waves, each man eager to shift blame before the emperor turned his gaze upon them. Aelius stood rigid, listening as his failures were dissected with clinical cruelty, yet defiance stirred in him, thin but persistent, a spark against the suffocating gloom. The emperor reclined upon the marble throne, fingers tapping in steady rhythm, shaping a sentence without breath or ink. His eyes never left Aelius, as if reading value and threat in equal measure. Sister Eleni knelt beside Livius, whispering encouragement as she pressed a folded cloth to his ribs, her voice soft enough to vanish beneath the cold debate. Aelius understood that he no longer faced judgment for a lost campaign, but for the political storm his survival had created. The chamber felt narrower with each whispered accusation, each nervous glance toward the throne. When a Praetorian stepped forward and signaled for Aelius to move, the corridor behind him seemed to darken, as if the palace itself anticipated his descent. A cold certainty settled in his chest. His suffering had not begun. It had merely been named. As he was led away, Aelius felt the weight of unseen forces tightening around him. Servants halted mid-step, watching through lowered lashes, aware that proximity to a disgraced general invited danger. Sister Eleni rose with sudden resolve, attempting to follow before a guard barred her path. Her eyes held both fear and a vow of loyalty, a silent promise that his story would not vanish beneath imperial decrees. She whispered hope into fading air. The Tullianum swallowed sound, leaving only the scrape of Aelius breathing against the damp floor as moisture dripped in slow, merciless rhythm from the vaulted stone. The air tasted of rust and old suffering. Sister Eleni was granted a fleeting end. Trance, her lantern casting trembling halos that slid across walls etched with forgotten names, each mark a plea that had never reached the sunlit world. She knelt beside him, whispering encouragement while her fingers traced the swelling along his ribs. Her touch steadied his thoughts, yet regret rose like a tide as he relived the ambush that had shattered his legion. A torn parchment hidden within a narrow crack caught the glow of her lantern. Later catalogued as a prison scribbler's note, it spoke of generals who vanished without record, consumed by the empire they once defended. Aelius studied the parchment in silence before folding it against his chest. Resilience stirred when he spoke softly with Eleni about the soldiers who still believed in him, men who had followed him into ruin without hesitation. Livius, half-starved yet unbroken, leaned against the opposite wall, clutching a chipped cup of water. He claimed he heard clandestine movements above the cell, faint scuffs and murmurs, as if officials prepared something theatrical. The boy's eyes, hollow yet alert, darted toward the ceiling each time the dust shifted. Eleni murmured a prayer over him as she wrapped his hands in a torn strip of her veil, her breath unsteady but resolute. Aelius felt a thin thread of hope tighten between them, fragile yet defiant. Then a silent attendant entered, carrying iron rings that glinted beneath the lantern's glow. He polished them with deliberate care, his expression fixed and hollow. Dread coiled within Aelius. Something worse than execution waited beyond this room. Before dawn, Aelius was dragged beneath the Palatine into an underground pit where the air tasted of iron and damp earth. Rows of enslaved artisans worked in silence, their shadows jerking across the walls as torches hissed and spat resin. Ropes dangled from ceiling beams like nooses awaiting names, while sharpened stakes stood arranged in ritual precision, their tips stained from earlier tests. The construction resembled neither a stage nor an execution ground. It felt like a place built to erase a man piece by piece. Sister Eleni stood near the entrance, pleading with a centurion for access to Livius. The boy's fever had worsened through the night, leaving him shaking beneath rough blankets, yet the guards denied her with cold indifference. When they shoved her backward, her lantern struck the floor and rolled across the dust, illuminating a carved inscription half buried beneath splinters. Later, excavators would record its words, "Honor through suffering." The phrase revealed the emperor's intent more clearly than any decree. Aelius felt fear coil through him, but it hardened into something sharper as he realized he was meant to be displayed not as a criminal, but as a spectacle, a living emblem of imperial disappointment. He watched the artisans work with downcast eyes, each movement rehearsed as if any hesitation might cost them breath. Yet one among them, an older craftsman with a crooked spine and soot-blackened hands, looked at him with quiet intelligence. Sabinus. While pretending to measure distances between pulleys, Sabinus knelt and traced faint lines into the dust, narrow side passages, blind corners, weak timber joints, escape routes disguised as idle marks. Aelius met his gaze, understanding the risk. No words passed. None could. The chamber itself seemed to listen. But rebellion never lives unnoticed in a place shaped by fear. During inspection, a supervisor called for roll. Sabinus stepped forward, then froze when a soldier whispered something into the overseer's ear. Moments later, he was gone, dragged through a side door with terrifying silence, leaving only a smear of dust where his foot had scraped the floor. Aelius felt the breath leave his body. The emperor anticipated resistance. The trap was complete. Yet as the torches crackled and the machinery groaned overhead, he swore he would not walk willingly into the fate designed for him. Something had to break, whether the stage or the empire itself. Roman streets awakened with drums that throbbed like a single monstrous heartbeat as Aelius was led through the forum. The rising sun struck his battered armor, now reduced to torn remnants of his own battle standard, stitched crudely into a mockery of valor. Dust clung to the fabric, shivering with every step he took toward the amphitheater that loomed ahead like a waiting mouth. Sister Eleni followed close behind, clutching a small jar of medicinal salve so tightly that her knuckles blanched. To her, the jar had become more than medicine. It was a fragile promise that she could still protect someone in a world where compassion was treated as treason. The crowd surged around them, a tide of faces twisted by spectacle hunger. Children flung ashes at Aelius as though participating in a rite they did not understand. Soldiers lined the streets, muttering curses rehearsed for the ears of superiors. Yet among the venom, pockets of grief flicker. A group of veterans bowed their heads as he passed, their silence more powerful than any lament. One elderly man formed the sign of Fortuna across his chest in trembling fingers. A charred fragment from a vendor's sign, later uncovered by archaeologists, recorded the day's message, a sight never before granted to the people. Rome had always known cruelty, but today it wished to witness history's unmaking. Aelius felt regret burn like acid when he saw Livius carried on a stretcher, his skin pale, his eyes glassy. The boy had begged not to be left behind, desperate to prove loyalty even in weakness. Sister Eleni tried to reach for him, but the guards pushed her back with spear hafts. The procession halted. The emperor's entourage entered the street, shimmering with wealth that seemed obscene against the city's grief. The emperor rode beneath a canopy of embroidered gold, his expression carved in triumph. He did not look at Aelius. He looked through him, as though gazing upon a tool already broken. When the amphitheater gates groaned open, a cold wind rushed outward, carrying the scent of fresh timber and oiled iron. Inside, Aelius glimpsed a sprawling construction, far larger and darker than any execution stage. Ramps, platforms, wheeled structures, and towering frames cast monstrous shadows across the sand. It was not a place to kill a man. It was a place to unmake him. And as Aelius crossed the threshold, he sensed the twist he feared most. Whatever awaited him inside had been crafted with precision, cruelty, and purpose, shaped not to end his life, but to destroy his legacy. The amphitheater exhaled a cold breath as Aelius stepped inside, its vast stone ribs lit by torches that spat resin into the air. Before him rose a grotesque gallery, effigies crafted from wood, wax, and scraps of armor, each shaped with horrifying accuracy into the likeness of the soldiers who had died under his command. Sister Eleni gasped when she saw one bearing Livius's features, painted with bruises that matched the boy's current wounds, though he still breathed weakly behind her. Aelius felt his chest tighten. It was not death the emperor sought, it was erasure. A shard of painted wood lay half buried in the sand, its surface marked by Sabinus's hurried strokes. Break the cycle. Aelius touched the fragment with trembling fingers, aware it might be the last act of the man who tried to help him. The emperor descended into view, surrounded by Praetorians. His voice echoed with ceremonial finality as he declared the spectacle a reenactment of failure. Mechanisms creaked overhead, lowering ropes that would puppeteer Aelius into positions mimicking his battlefield defeat, transforming every remembered mistake into public theater. As gears groaned, guilt surged through him, but determination struck harder. He refused to let Rome devour the memory of his men. Sister Eleni raised her voice in a covert signal, one taught by Sabinus in whispers. Workers hiding among the stage crews responded instantly. A torch was dropped. A pulley snapped free. Chaos erupted across the stands as shadows sprinted through the corridors. Aelius fought toward Livius, heart pounding, sand burning beneath his feet. He could almost reach the boy's outstretched hand when a shadow detached itself behind him. Armor shifted. Steel glinted. A new threat, unseen until now, lunged from the perimeter of the Emperor's guard. And the trap tightened around him once more. Smoke drifted in slow spirals above the ruined arena, clinging to Sister Eleni's hair as she moved through the rubble with shaking hands. The air tasted of ash and blood, and every step stirred embers that glowed like dying stars. She called out for survivors, her voice raw, her heartbeat clashing with distant alarms that signaled soldiers regrouping beyond the walls. Aelius staggered beside her, his tunic torn, his breathing ragged, but he remained upright through sheer will. Livius, cradled against a fallen pillar, drifted in and out of consciousness, the boy's weakened grip clutching at Aelius's wrist. Beneath the collapsed seating, Eleni uncovered a soot-covered mask used by Sabinus's rebels. Its interior bore faint scratches, perhaps a coded message lost to flame, yet it proved the craftsman had orchestrated far more resistance than they understood. Aelius felt a pulse of hope, faint but undeniable. Rome had trembled tonight. Someone had dared to challenge the spectacle. A group of sympathetic soldiers emerged from shadowed archways, their armor dirtied to disguise allegiance. They approached cautiously, offering sanctuary beyond the city walls. One soldier pressed a worn map into Aelius's palm, routes through vineyards, dry aqueduct channels, hidden goat paths leading toward the mountains. Aelius met his gaze, reading silent loyalty in the man's eyes. Yet regret gnawed at him when he looked back at the arena. Imperial banners crackled beneath rising flames, their golden threads burning into black smoke. He knew the emperor would bury this night under proclamations, rewriting the rebellion as treachery, painting Aelius as villain, coward, or ghost. Truth rarely survived Rome. As they slipped into the outskirts, the night wind carried the distant thunder of hooves. Torches flickered along the ridge behind them. Imperial riders had not abandoned the chase. Aelius tightened his hold on Livius, urging the group into the olive-lined paths ahead. Rome was not finished with him, and the darkness was moving fast. Weeks later, hidden among the mountain crags where cold winds carved the stone, Aelius pressed a stylus into a wax tablet and began documenting the truth Rome sought to erase. The small fire beside him flickered against the walls of their refuge, casting wavering halos over the survivors who huddled in blankets. Future excavators would find this tablet near a collapsed hearth, its edges burned but its words intact, a testament to defiance. Sister Eleni ground herbs with methodical care, her touch gentle as she applied poultices to Livius's arms. The boy healed slowly, though shadows lingered in his eyes, remnants of the horrors he witnessed in chains and sand. At night he dreamed of effigies, ropes, and screams. Yet he listened intently whenever Aelius spoke, determined to carry truth forward. More fugitives arrived, former soldiers, artisans, slaves freed during the chaos, forming a small but resolute network. They traded coded messages, carved symbols into bark, and mapped safe routes across ravines. Aelius felt resilience rise within him, something reborn from the ashes of the arena. This was no longer merely survival. It was purpose. Rumors reached them through shepherds. The emperor considered a punitive campaign, determined to grind dissent beneath legionary boots. Aelius knew hiding would protect no one. Silence only fed Rome's hunger. One evening, after sealing another tablet of testimony, he stepped outside into the cold air. Below in the valley, faint torches glimmered, travelers or scouts he could not tell. Wind carried distant horns, stretched thin by distance. Their fragile legacy swayed on a knife edge. And the empire was beginning to stir.